to our speaker, Kaila Colbin, who is a native New Yorker, as you'll find out in about 30 seconds. Kaila is the New Zealand ambassador for Singularity University, which again you will find out more about during her talk today. She's also chairman of the Ministry of Awesome, which sounds like the world's best job to me. I don't know exactly how that works, but we'll find out again. And also you're the curator of TEDx in Christchurch, an established writer, a communications expert, and tomorrow night up for a prestigious New Zealand Women of Influence Award, which we wish her all the best of luck for. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Kaila to the stage.
Thank you. Thanks, Andy. So are you gonna? What's the deal here? Are you gonna Trump stalk me from behind?
Where do you want? Do you roam or what?
Wherever you like. Whatever you want to do.
I'll just sit here and I won't move. I promise.
Sweet. Okay. All right. You let me know if he gets up to some shady business. Thank you for that kind introduction. It is really a pleasure to be here. I had the privilege of presenting at a Spark Lab in Auckland a couple of months ago. They were sort of an okay audience. I have really high expectations of you guys. No, they were fantastic, and I expect you to be even more fantastic. As Andy said, I am the New Zealand ambassador for Singularity University. I do wear many other hats. Ministry of Awesome, not an official government agency. I know I'm in Wellington, so I have to be a little bit careful. But really, Singularity University is what I'm going to be talking about tonight. And it's an organization that was founded by these two guys. And these guys are really kind of titans of the tech world. So the guy on the right, Peter Diamandis, he started X Prize Foundation, which does large cash prizes for really ambitious but really well-bounded engineering challenges. So the first one that they did was a $10 million US prize for the first private group that could get a manned vehicle to space and back, land it safely, and then repeat that feat within 2 weeks. And that prize is what led to Virgin Galactic, it's what led to SpaceX. Pretty much the entire private space industry was kickstarted by this large cash prize. And they've gone on to replicate that model in all sorts of industries to tackle drought, to tackle education, to tackle healthcare. And they found that as a model, it's incredibly effective for spurring investment into R&D and innovation. They put up a large cash prize. They put this really sexy, ambitious challenge out in front of people, and they'll get hundreds of teams competing around the world for these prizes. And those teams collectively will invest anywhere from 10 to 100 times the value of the prize in coming towards their solution. Not only that, but you get several hundred perspectives on the problem rather than just one group trying to solve it. Peter's known for many other things. He's written several best-selling books. He's started many other companies. He's really just a phenomenal guy all around. The guy on the left, Ray Kurzweil, he is a legend. He invented everything. He invented flatbed scanners. He invented optical character recognition. He invented text-to-speech for blind people. He invented the Kurzweil synthesizer. He's got 21 honorary doctorates. He's received honors from 3 US presidents. He's a director of engineering at Google. But most relevant to this talk is that they've gone back and looked at the predictions he's made about technology since the early 90s, and they found that he has an 86% accuracy rate. So if you think about the kind of magnitude of technological change we've seen in the past 20, 30 years, that's a really incredible accomplishment, 86%. To the specificity of, he predicted that by 1998, a computer would beat a human at chess. And of course, in 1997, IBM's Deep Blue beat Garry Kasparov at chess. So that level of specificity. So when Ray Kurzweil talks about where technology is going and why, generally worth paying attention to what he has to say. So I first got involved with SU about a year and a half ago. I attended their executive program, and they're housed at the NASA Ames Research Center in Silicon Valley in Mountain View. NASA Ames is simultaneously one of the coolest places on the planet and one of the weirdest places on the planet. So I rock up there and I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm at NASA, it's so cool. There's a space shuttle, and then you look a little bit more closely and the space shuttle's kind of made of paper mache and sort of dinged up and shonky. And the whole place is it's really massive and it's dotted with these random aircraft and spacecraft, but it's also kind of deserted. And there are all these structures that you have no idea what they're for. This thing was directly opposite the barracks where we were staying. It's to give you a sense of scale. I don't know if you guys can see, but there's this teeny yellow dot way at the bottom. That's a street sign. So this thing is gigantic. And the whole thing opens. You can see that line that comes down the front. That whole front opens up. It was originally built to house fully inflated blimps. The star on top, we had no idea what that was about. I mean, it was just weird. Like, everything was just a head trip the whole time we were there. And while we were there, I spent a week there. We did all sorts of fun things. We did the Marshmallow Challenge. Anybody do the Marshmallow Challenge? A couple of nodding heads. For those who aren't familiar, Marshmallow Challenge, you get divvied up into teams. You get given 20 sticks of spaghetti, a meter of tape, a meter of string, and a marshmallow. You get 18 minutes. You have to build the tallest structure you can, and the marshmallow has to be on top. The guys who invented this challenge, incidentally, have run it like thousands of times around the world. They have found that consistently the teams that do among the worst in the Marshmallow Challenge are recent MBA graduates. And teams who perform among the best are kindergarten kids, so like 5-year-olds, which tells you something about the relative kind of skill set. So we did that. We played with robots a lot. Some of you guys might have seen this kind of robot before, a bit of a dancing robot. This is a Rubik's Cube solving robot. You give the messed up Rubik's Cube to a robot at the top, solves it, ends up solved on the right. This, by the way, this is a Lego Mindstorms project. So any of you who have kids will know Lego is not an inexpensive hobby, but it is a retail product, right? This is something that, like, you know, this kind of level of robotics is something that used to be available only to, you know, the most expensive research institutes. And this is now a product that anyone can buy off the shelf. We did sumo wrestling with robots. We went out to a place called Tech Shop. We built our own robots, and then we weaponized them with forks and paper plates and, you know, duct tape and whatever, pitted them against each other. Your robot has to find the other robot and push it off the platform. The robots are really dumb. They can only see the white line around the edge and the other robot, so they basically just turn in circles until they find the other robot. I cannot tell you how satisfying it was to have your robot push the other robot off the platform. Like, I never realized the level of bloodlust in my heart until I did sumo wrestling robots. But the truth is that Singularity University is not just about robots, and I know you guys didn't come out tonight just to look at my holiday snaps. Really, what we're here to talk about is SU's mission, which is about leveraging exponential technology to address some of humanity's biggest challenges. So I spent a week learning about all sorts of bright, shiny things. Things like nanotechnology, biotechnology, artificial intelligence, the future of crime, the future of work. Underpinning all of it, some really profound insights that start with this guy. So this is Gordon Moore. He's one of the co-founders of Intel. And in 1965, he made the observation that the number of transistors we could fit on an integrated circuit had been doubling every 18 to 24 months as far back as we could see. And he made a prediction that that number would continue to double as far forward as we could see. This became known as Moore's Law. You may have heard of it. So the first key insight from SU comes from Ray Kurzweil, who zoomed out on Moore's Law. And he said, actually, if instead of looking at the number of transistors on a chip, we look instead at what we might call the price performance of computing. How many million instructions per second can you buy for $1,000? Turns out that number has been doubling for over 100 years, starting way back with the beginning of computing with electromechanical punch cards, and then moving on to relays, and then vacuum tubes, and then transistors, and then integrated circuits. And every time we max out on a particular technology, another technology comes along to continue that underlying doubling trend. Here's another way to think about it. Today, for $1,000, you can buy roughly the number of instructions per second that a mouse brain can process. But according to Kurzweil, by about 2023, for $1,000, you'll be able to buy the number of instructions per second that a human brain can process. And by 2049, for $1,000, you'll be able to buy the number of instructions per second of all human brains on the planet combined. This doubling curve explains why you today, via the smartphone in your pocket, have access to more information than Bill Clinton had the entire time that he was president of the United States. I reckon that's why he looks kind of pissed off in this picture. He's like, wish I had an iPhone when I was in the Oval Office. Although I'm sure he's super glad Instagram was not a thing when he was around. So the second key insight that comes out of SU is that that exponential trend, that doubling curve, does not just apply to computing. It applies to any information-enabled technology. You think about something like photography. Photography used to be substrate enabled. It was dependent on the physical film for you to do the thing. And then it became information enabled, dependent instead on ones and zeros. And today you can buy a smartphone with a 41 megapixel camera in it, and you don't really think twice about it. That seems like, sure, why not? So some of the technologies that we're observing that are following these doubling trends are computing, is obviously the base one, but also artificial intelligence, robotics, biotechnology, nanotechnology, medicine, neuroscience, energy, all following similar doubling curves. So why are doubling curves so important? What's so interesting about them? Turns out they have a few really curious characteristics that make them kind of imperative to pay attention to. And the first is that they look flat for a really long time. And you'll know this if you ever tried to do that trick where you fold a bit of paper in half 8 times, right? First fold is easy, second fold is easy, third fold is easy, 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 easy. You're like, this trick is so dumb, so easy, why am I even doing it? And it's not until you hit that 6th, 7th, 8th fold of the paper that things start to get really crazy. The second is that our brains are totally not wired for it, right? We evolved on the savannah, running from predators and chasing prey that behaved in predictable linear ways, right? You could expect your prey to run from that side of the room to that side of the room. Wasn't even a room, right? From that side of the field to that side of the field. You wouldn't expect your prey to run from that side of the field to the moon. And so we didn't evolve that way of thinking, that exponential way of thinking. And so as a result, the experts continue to predict linear no matter how much evidence we have to the contrary. Gordon Moore twice said that Moore's law was over. Both times proven wrong. Like Gordon Moore, the guy who invented the law, can't get his own law right. So I don't know what hope the rest of us have. But the difference between something following a linear progression and something following a doubling curve is insane. 30 linear steps, and I'm back at the food. 30 doubling steps, and I'm 26 times around the planet. And the tricky thing there is that we're not halfway until the 29th step. So it's really hard to measure how we're tracking as we go. This is another way to think about it. That white line is what we call traditional linear business growth, held aloft by sustaining innovations, right? So these are things like your car goes from having an 8-track to a cassette tape to a CD player to a 6 CD changer. Like it's doing the same thing it always did, but like a little better, a little faster, kind of small upgrades. That red curve is an exponential curve, looking flat for a really long time as the technology goes from 0.001 to 0.002 to 0.004 to 0.008. It's doubling, but from afar it still looks like 0. And so it's hanging out down there in what we call the trough of disappointment. Deception and disillusionment. And then what happens? It hits that inflection point, that 6th, 7th, 8th fold of the paper, and it goes from disappointment into chaos and amazement, seemingly overnight, and all the incumbents say, it came out of nowhere. There's no way we could have known. Here's a really good example of this. So quick show of hands, how many people think self-driving cars are going to be a thing in the hands of consumers on the roads within 10 years? Show of hands. Cool. 5 years? 2 years? Okay. Sweet. This is the Tesla Model S. Elon Musk and his team have sold over 100,000 of these. Last October, they released a push update to these vehicles. That means they got the upgrade overnight while their owners slept, didn't have to do anything to get it, giving them autopilot functionality. And this is a guy asleep at the wheel while his Tesla drives down the road. You can see his head is like that. This might look scary to you. This doesn't scare me. The robot's driving that car, that's okay. The thing that scares me is the guy who's taking the video. That guy should be watching the road. So in terms of that time frame, they've taken over 400,000 pre-orders for the Model 3. Those guys roll off the line next year, according to plan. Everyone will come standard with autopilot functionality. The president of Lyft, which is Uber's major competitor in the States, has said the majority of their fleet will be self-driving within 5 years. When these things hit, when we hit that 6th, 7th, 8th fold of the paper, that inflection point, they come so much faster than we're thinking. Now, some of you may have seen that Tesla recently had its first fatality with a Model S in autopilot mode. And one of the things that people who pay a lot of attention to self-driving cars were concerned about was that we knew there was going to be a fatality eventually, right? We knew that someone, like this would happen. And so the fear was that once this happened, there would be this intense pushback. It was a terrible idea to begin with. We never should let robots drive our cars. Like, what were we thinking? Cancel the whole thing, right? So that hasn't really happened, and there's a couple of reasons why. So the first is that when this fatality happened, it was after Teslas had logged over 130 million miles in autopilot mode. So by way of comparison, in the US, we average a fatality every 94 million miles. Worldwide, that number is closer to 1 in 60 million. So straight out of the gate, and there's some reasons why this isn't an exact comparison, but it gives you a good kind of gauge. Straight out of the gate, the Teslas are doing pretty well in terms of safety, like twice as well as the global average. But here's the really important thing to consider. When is the last time that a human driver got into a car accident and you became a better driver as a result? It doesn't happen, right? Like, people get into accidents all the time, and the rest of us continue eating our breakfast, putting our makeup on, texting, whatever. But what happens when a Tesla in autopilot mode gets into an accident? Immediately, massive teams from Tesla, from the National Highway Transportation Safety Administration, like, everybody descends on the vehicle. What happened? What went wrong? Was it the contrast recognition? Was it the image recognition? Was it the braking system? Was it the warning to the driver, the handoff mode? Like, what was it? And then every improvement that they find, every upgrade they can make, again, gets pushed out to every other vehicle on the road, and they all become better as a result. And that's exactly what happened with Tesla after this fatality. They released a free 8.0 upgrade. This is a software upgrade. It got pushed out. You didn't have to do anything to get it. That would have prevented that crash and will prevent all future crashes like it. Now, it's not to say there won't be any future crashes, but that particular problem has been solved with this upgrade. And that is why these things get better, because we continue to build on the best possible iteration of what we currently have. Something to consider in Christchurch, where I live, where we're currently rebuilding the city for the next several generations, is that self-driving cars don't need parking. They just need a place to wait. And if the place they're waiting is inconvenient, they can go wait somewhere else. So, I used to work out of an office where there's just this great big honking car park building being built across the street from me. And I'd go into work every day and I'd look at that building and go, what's the payback period on that building? 20 years, 25 years, 50 years? Any developers in the room? Like, it's not insubstantial, a building. Are they thinking about this stuff? Are we considering this in our long-term strategic decision-making processes, in our infrastructure investments? Because we should be. Because otherwise we'll be left saying, it came out of nowhere. There's no way we could have known. Right. So the other thing that's happening is that these technologies are not only accelerating, but they are also starting to converge. And now we have to consider what happens when an exponential progression in something like artificial intelligence converges with an exponential progression in robotics or big data. What happens when an exponential progression in biotechnology or bioengineering converges with an exponential progression in 3D printing at the atomic scale? And of course, what happens is that everything starts to progress even faster. What does all of this mean? Pretty much everything you've seen in science fiction is not only possible, but plausible, and probably already here. Here's a good example. Anybody know what this is? It's a terrible picture. Can anyone see it? No? Tricorder, I've got one Star Trek fan, yes. Star Trek medical tricorder. So what would happen on Star Trek? You'd go down to some alien planet, you come back with some alien bug, you go to the sick bay, they have a handheld device, they run it up and down, tell you what's wrong with you, probably fix you with it. This is what it looks like in real life. This is called the Xanadu Scout. It's part of a $10 million tricorder X Prize for the first handheld device that can beat the diagnosis of 7 out of 10 board-certified physicians across a range of 12 ailments. They started with over 300 teams. They're down to the final 7. They're doing clinical trials now. The winner will be announced in January. The Star Trek tricorder is now a thing. You can buy it. Here's another really good example, 3D printing. I hadn't realized until I went to SU, 3D printing is actually been around for over 35 years, right? Of course, I'd heard about 3D printing before I went there, but I hadn't realized it's been around for quite so long. 35 years of like, oh my gosh, it's going to revolutionize everything. And what do we actually get? shitty models of Yoda's head. Like, this is not revolutionary, to be clear, right? No, there is no incumbent, shitty Yoda's head model industry that's freaking out because the maker bots are coming to eat its lunch. But so here's what happened. When I came away from SU, one of the experiences that I had was it took all of these sort of disparate data points that I already had. Like, I'd already heard about 3D printing. I'd already heard about self-driving cars. I'd heard about artificial intelligence, like all these kind of separate, like, oh yeah, that's sort of vaguely in my consciousness, right? And it took all those data points and put them together into a coherent narrative that all of a sudden, like, the world just made a whole new kind of sense to me. Like, I don't know if you guys have ever seen those videos on Facebook where someone's doing a painting, and it's like a huge, like, round canvas or something, and they're painting. You have no idea what they're painting, and they're doing this whole thing, and then they do like the last stroke, and they turn it upside down, and it's Nelson Mandela or something. That was what it was like for me. It was like I had all those bits of painting, and then they did a last stroke and turned it upside down. I was like, oh my gosh. And so this is a really good example, right? I leave SU, and a week after I leave SU, I go to TED. And at TED, this guy, Joseph D. Simone, gets up on stage, and he's like, 3D printing sucks. It sucks. And the reason it sucks is because it's not actually 3D printing. It's 2D printing over and over again. You print a layer, and then another layer, and another layer, and another layer. And as a result, you have all sorts of problems. You can't really do bridges. You can't do spans. You can't do objects within objects. The mechanical tolerances are terrible. The structural integrity is terrible. It's super slow, and it's super expensive. So he's like, I don't want a 3D printer that's a 2D printer over and over again. I want a 3D printer that works more like the T-1000 from Terminator 2. I want my 3D object to just emerge fully formed from the soup, to just be pulled out of the liquid and just be the thing. And so he built it. That's what he was there to launch. This is it. It's called CLIP, Continuous Liquid Interface Production. That plate at the top pulls the object fully formed from that tray of substrate soup at the bottom. It fixes every issue with current 3D printing. You can do bridges, you can do spans, you can do objects with an object. The mechanical tolerances are perfect. The structural integrity is perfect. It's 25 to 100 times faster than current 3D printing technology. So I watch him present this, and I had three reactions. The first was what it would have been anyway, which was like, whoa, that's really cool. But my second reaction was, of course, it's 25 to 100 times faster, and not 7% faster, because that's what an exponential curve looks like. Of course, as D. Simone says, the next iteration is going to be 1,000 times faster. And my third reaction was, oh, now I get it. Now I get how 3D printing totally disrupts global manufacturing and freight. Because why would you ever pay to manufacture 20,000 of something in China and pay to ship it and pay to store it and have waste and have loss and have theft and have it go out of date when you literally can push the button and get the thing? That was about a year and a half ago. They took on a bunch of money. They launched their first commercial product this past April. This is from maybe 2 months ago. HP just launched a Jet Fusion 3D printer. It can print electronics inside a product. It is 10 times as fast and half the cost of its previous models. That is the price-performance curve at work. Remember that price-performance of computing that we talked about, how many million instructions per second you can buy for $1,000? This is price. When you see a new technology and it says it's X times as fast for Y fraction of the price, that is your price performance curve at work. And that's exactly the whole point. If you take nothing else away from this presentation, I want you to wake up at 3 in the morning going, price performance. Right. Crime also taking advantage of exponential technologies. You might have seen this story from last year. Computer hacker on a plane hacked into the plane's operating systems, briefly increased power to one of the engines, caused the plane to fly sideways for about 15 seconds. Couple of crazy things about this story. I mean, the story's crazy to begin with. A couple of even crazier things. The first is that he hacked in via the in-flight entertainment system. So like the USB port in the seat back in front of you, that's how he got in. And the second thing about this story is that what it tells me is that you can be super smart about computers, but really dumb in other ways. And I tell you this for a couple of reasons. Number one, I question the wisdom, and I suspect you would as well, of messing with the engines of a plane that you yourself are on. Like, right off the bat, that seems like a bad idea to me. And number two, once he had done this, he then tweeted about it from his seat. And so, somewhat unsurprisingly, the FBI was there to pick him up when the plane landed. And so it's kind of a funny story, but the moral is relevant, which is that when everything is connected, everything is vulnerable. And our whole concept of security, of criminality, of justice, all of those concepts need to be revisited in a world of tomorrow that looks nothing like the world of yesterday. What does it all add up to? Huge opportunity, right? I mentioned at the beginning, SU's mission is to empower people to leverage these exponential technologies to address some of humanity's biggest challenges, and I'll talk about some of those opportunities a bit later, but also a not insignificant amount of terror. So current projections are that anywhere from 47 to 81% of jobs, as we currently understand them, are under threat from technology within 20 years. Here's a good example. So you might have seen this from maybe 2 months ago. I think it was on the news as well. An Apple supplier, Foxconn, one of their big factories in China, they recently cut 60,000 jobs and replaced them with robots. This is a horrible headline, right? Like I don't want to dismiss this headline as anything other than something really traumatic for those 60,000 people. What I will say is that to those of us in the Western world, this is a narrative that we've heard before, right? We have heard this plot line before. It doesn't upset our view of the world. Factory workers replaced by automation. That's like, we're used to that story. A little less so this one. Artificially intelligent lawyer hired by its first law firm. Or this one. Artificially intelligent chatbot successfully contests 160,000 parking tickets in New York and London. This is a free service. It was created by a 19-year-old. He says it's just the tip of the iceberg. Or this one, artificially intelligent teaching assistant helps students online for an entire semester and nobody notices. And the reason these things are possible is because, that price performance curve, the Foxconn thing is the price side of the price performance curve. But this is the performance side, right? Now computers are getting so good that they are starting to encroach on skills and capabilities that have historically been the exclusive realm of humans. So here's a really good example, image recognition, right? Like, people are awesome at image recognition. We're awesome at it from the moment we're born, because your only job when you're born is image recognition. You need to know who's your mom and where's the boob. Like, those are your two, that's all you need. And so image recognition is like key to your survival. Computers, not so much, like they're terrible at it. But recently, they've started to make some really big leaps forward with image recognition. Here's the first one. They got the deep learning algorithm to be able to recognize cats in images. Huge leap forward, right? The whole team is like, oh my gosh, amazing, champagne, slaps on the back, celebration. So I have a 3-year-old stepson. He can recognize cats pretty well. He has like no job offers, right? This is not a marketable skill. So, but of course they don't stop there, keep working at it, make another huge leap forward. They go from being able to recognize cats to being able to recognize numbers. Again, massive leap forward, like huge accomplishment, champagne, celebration. My 6-year-old stepson can recognize numbers pretty well. Still no job offers. But then they go from this to being able to recognize mitosis in cancer cells, which currently requires a trained pathologist. Except the computer can do it 1,000 times as fast and 1,000 at a time, and will only ever get better at it. Every new human pathologist has to start from zero. Every new computer starts with the sum total of all the knowledge of all the previous computers, which is why these things increase exponentially. We are using ever better tools to build ever better tools. This is a happier slide. It doesn't look like that from the title, Welcome to the Terror Dome. I didn't give it that title. That title was given to it by the people who made it. That's the Energy Information Agency, the CIA, and the World Bank. And what we're looking at here is the inverse of the price performance of computing slide that I showed at the beginning. So that was looking at how many million instructions per second you could buy for $1,000. This is looking at the price per million BTUs of energy by different fuel types. And so what happens? We've got 5 different fuel types. And starting, on the y-axis, we've got that price per million BTUs. And on the x-axis, we've got the year. And starting at 1949 and moving along and sort of bumping along the bottom, goes up, goes down, goes up, goes down. Over time, it gradually trends upwards. Those are our fossil fuels, right? That's Henry Hub, bituminous coal, crude oil, liquid natural gas. Those are linear technologies. That is what linear technologies do. They go up, they go down. Over time, they gradually trend upwards. What happens over here? It doesn't even come onto the chart until like 2006. And when it comes onto the chart, it is so expensive that all the incumbents are like, it's never going to be a thing. No one will ever buy it. It can never compete. And then the price plummets. That is solar. Solar is currently following a doubling in price performance every 22 months. At current rates of progress, we're going to hit 100% of world energy supply delivered by solar within about 20 years. And if that trend holds, that means in about 22 years, we're at 200%, 24 years, 400%, 800%, 1600%. And then we have to completely shift our mindset away from a scarcity model and towards an abundance model. What does our world look like if energy is free and abundant? What does it look like if healthcare is free and abundant, if education is free and abundant? We've built our entire economic model based on the allocation of scarce resources. What do we do if that model is no longer true? Let's talk about agri. I'm going to close with this because this is one of the things, I talked about one of the things that happened to me at SU was that, that coherent narrative, that paradigm shift. One of the other things that happened was I came away struck by this really profound realization. I know I am a New Yorker born and bred, but I'm also a Kiwi. I've been living in Christchurch 11 years, became a citizen in 2013. And when I came away from SU, I was struck by this really profound realization of the vastness of the impacts on New Zealand, on everybody in the world, but on New Zealand in particular. And some of those impacts, I think, are most shown in agriculture. So 3 vectors I want to talk about where we can look to for disruption in agriculture. And the first is sort of those sustaining innovations that I talked about, where we continue to look at farming, but we use exponential tech to kind of do the same thing we've done before, just using technology to do it, right? So this is a self-driving tractor. These are becoming really common now. We now have robots that can prune trees, that can pick fruit. I have a great little video of a robot sewing a grape close. I don't know any farmers that do that today, but in case anybody wanted to, they could. So that's one area, right, where we take our current farming model and we automate aspects of it. But here's another one, and this was one of those really kind of whoa moments that I had there. So we had this guy, Raymond McCauley. He's the digital biology guy, and he got up on stage while I was at the exec program, and he talked about bioengineered milk. And he talked about this team that had made milk. They had taken like a yeast and genetically modified it with cow proteins and, done some magic to it, I don't know. And they brewed milk in a lab, and chemically and genetically it was milk. It was cow milk, like exactly. It just hadn't gone through a cow. And they'd done the same with human milk, and they'd done it with narwhal milk. Narwhals, the unicorns of the sea, right? So anyway, I watched Raymond give this presentation, and my reaction's like, ew, gross. Who would want it? It sounds disgusting. Okay, set that to one side for a moment. Late that night, I was having an offline conversation with Salim Ismail, who's the founding executive director of SU, and we weren't actually talking about the milk or even synthetic meat. We were talking about bioengineered eggs. And this company that SU is involved in called Modern Meadow. And I'll tell you what, I'm a super lefty liberal hippie. I need to know the name of the chicken before I'll eat an egg. And I'm that person. Don't go out to eat with me. It's horrible. And so he's telling me about the eggs, and my reaction to eggs is the same as my reaction to the milk. Ew, gross. Who would want it? It sounds disgusting. And he's like, Kaila, they're not targeting you. They don't care about you. They're not interested in the hippies. They don't care about the vegans. They don't even care about Whole Foods, which in the US is a pretty substantial customer. He was like, They're after the industrial caterers who buy eggs by the thousands of kilos. And they need them in powder form, and in liquid form, and in tube form. And they need them to last longer on the shelf and be 100% salmonella free and total certainty of supply. And they need them to brown nicely around the edges and taste more like egg. And they need them to be cheaper. And by every one of those metrics, the bioengineered product wins. And I went, shit, you're right. And I went, actually, the bioengineered milk product probably wins too, and the bioengineered meat product could win as well. Are we really taking this seriously in this country, like the potential disruptive threat? The disruptive threat of an Impossible Foods hamburger, which Andrew Priest, who's the CEO of Naitahu Farming, has just come back from California. He went and tried one of these Impossible Foods hamburger, which is like a burger that bleeds and sizzles, but it's made from plants. And he was like, it's amazing. The disruptive threat of that is not that we now have a burger that the vegans can eat. It's that we now have a burger that the meat eaters will eat. That's when things start to get really crazy. Right. The third vector where we're seeing this potential disruption is something that I thought I didn't quite get. At the beginning, I looked at this chart. This is another one of those price performance charts. We're looking at LED lighting, right? LED lighting, the price has gone down by 90% in the past 5 or 6 years. The performance has doubled, right? Their lifespan has doubled. So I look at this chart and I'm like, cool, LED lighting, it's improved in price performance. What does that disrupt? I don't know, lights, like your light bulb, whatever. You buy, like, now you spend less on light bulbs, like, big deal. So turns out what it also disrupts is indoor farming. So when lighting was expensive and didn't perform very well, indoor farming was kind of the exclusive realm of, shall we say, high-value crops. And so what's happened, because of this exponential improvement in the price performance of LED lighting, we're now seeing indoor farms in disused nightclubs in New Jersey supplying produce to New York City supermarkets at price parity with organic produce coming out of California. In Japan, the world's largest indoor farm is 100 times more productive per square foot than traditional farming. It uses 40% less power, generates 80% less food waste, and of particular importance to New Zealand, uses 99% less water. Who would vote for the indoor farm over the outside model? Totally controlled conditions, right? As we start to see the impacts of climate change hit more and more. I can tell you a lot of the farmers, I had a great conversation with some winemakers recently who were like, if I could have totally controlled conditions, oh my God, it's like the world is my oyster. Right, so I came away from SU feeling like, in addition to my world had been rocked, I had swallowed the red pill, I washed it down with Kool-Aid, you name it. I could never unlearn what I've learned, and I can never look at the world the same way again. And as I said, I had this profound sense of urgency and responsibility to share what I learned with New Zealand, to further this conversation in New Zealand, because these technologies throw up so many massive, thorny, philosophical, ethical, moral, social, you name it, questions that there are no easy answers to, and that we have to be collectively engaged in exploring if we want any kind of positive outcome. So I came back kind of on this mission, and so that's taken a few different forms. One is I do quite a lot of public speaking, and so I shifted pretty much every one of my public-facing talks is now this. It doesn't matter what people ask me to talk about. Like, you know, I'm involved with Ministry of Awesome. People go, oh, come and talk about community building after the quakes. And I'm like, yeah. And then I show up, and it's like, surprise, exponential tech. It was really fun. I did a talk for the University of the Third Age in Christchurch, which is like, they're all like 90. And I show up, I'm like, exponential tech. And they're like, what? Get out of here. Right, so the second thing is Salim Ismail, whom I mentioned, the founding exec director of SU. He came to visit New Zealand last year. Callaghan Innovation brought him down. He did a bit of a roadshow, Auckland, Wellington, Christchurch. Salim is an extraordinary presenter. He is one of the best I've ever seen. But I can tell you with my TEDx hat on that it doesn't matter how good a presenter is, a single talk does not drive behavior change. Right? Like you go, that guy was amazing, he totally blew my mind, and then you go back to work the next day, right? So the next step is to go, okay, like I hit that moment, like that moment of no return about day 2 of the exec program I did. So how can I get a critical mass of people in New Zealand having a robust enough immersion in this content that they all get to that point of no return, that I can't unlearn what I've just learned, and it is now incumbent upon me to bring this thinking into my workplace, into my school, into my government department, into my whatever. And so that's what we're doing. We're basically bringing the executive program here. So we're running the SingularityU New Zealand Summit. It's a condensed version of the exec program I did, but with the ambition of it being a powerful enough program that you get that sort of same paradigm shift. It's 3 days in November, 14th, 15th, 16th. It's at Horncastle Arena in Christchurch. It's a huge coup that it's coming to New Zealand. It's only the 5th place they're doing it this year. They did Mumbai, Berlin, Santiago in Chile, the Netherlands, and us, so go New Zealand. We're shipping in a bunch of the faculty from Silicon Valley. We have some awesome local presenters as well. It's totally contextualized for New Zealand. It's totally not an instance of, here come the overseas experts to give us the answers and tell us how it's done, but more that we collectively can expand our conversation. And I hope you all join us there. And that's it for me. I'm happy to take questions. Thank you so much for your kind attention.
All right. Thank you. All right, let's have some questions. Who's got one?
Live somewhere?
Yes. So I did a very similar talk to this at Spark Lab in Auckland, which is available in full online or in a 4-minute summary format. I suspect this one is going to be made available online as well.
Absolutely.
We've also made this talk in comic form. So if you prefer to read comics, we have this thing. Basically, it's very similar in comic form. So.
Yes, that's right. Spark Lab, yep, Facebook.
Not the comic, but the video, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, I signed
Spark
on.
Lab's on Facebook. It's the best place now.
I wanted to talk about the whole 80% of the workforce being unemployed. It's quite interesting and fascinating. So, 180 years ago, in Germany, I think it was about 20% of the population was unemployed, and it started a huge, massive revolution, and that didn't really end very well. If you're thinking we're talking 80% of the population, and even in small kind of communities like this, we can kind of take that on board, we can kind of process it, but when you're talking about, primary industry workers, 80% of the population is huge. How do you see that kind of progressing? And are we going to go to another social revolution where we do all end up in World War III, or with the likes of, education being more abundant in healthcare? Do you think we're going to go more about kind of a social revolution where actually we're looking after each other and we're striving to get men on the move and, save the planet? Where do you see us going?
That is such a great question and such an important one. Thank you for raising it. So, few things on that. First of all, you should totally come to Summit because that's the kind of conversation that we need to be having. One thing I will say, I think the precision of words is important. So to be clear, I didn't say that 80%. That we will have 80% unemployment. The stat that I quoted is from Osborne and Frey. It's 47 to 81% of jobs as we currently understand them under threat from technology, which is actually a very different thing. So we've got like 200 years of headlines saying the robots are going to come and eat all our jobs. Every time those shifts have happened, new technologies have created more jobs than they've done away with. So if you look to history, the fact that jobs are being done away with, there's some precedent to say, oh, well, actually, we're just going to, the rising tide lifts all boats and we're going to be fine because there are going to be billions of new jobs. I am not totally convinced by that argument. And the reason I'm not convinced is because we've never been here at this speed and at this scale. So one of the things that really concerns me is that, this presentation is designed to give you a taster of these technologies, and it's designed to kind of relate to you and your context. And so when I go through that thing of like the 60,000 jobs at Foxconn, but we're familiar with that narrative of factory workers being replaced by automation, and then I go on to the things that are scarier to people in the Western world, the lawyers and the accountants and the teachers and whatnot. To me, the Foxconn thing is actually much scarier than the fact that lawyers could now be replaced. And the reason it's scarier is because essentially what that headline is saying is that robots have now become so cheap that it is more economical to buy robots than it is to pay people like $5 or $10 a day, whatever they're getting paid at Foxconn, which is like nothing, right? And so, like, I have a study that says 137 million jobs in 5 Southeast Asian countries. So that's like, you know, Vietnam, Philippines, like, doesn't even count China, under threat from automation. And when I look at numbers like that, and I think about that historical precedent of, oh, well, you know, the Luddites were afraid of what was it, the sewing machines or something. And so they, you know, but then they created more jobs. But I look at a number like that and I'm like, I don't see where those new jobs are going to come from, because all of those people are employed in low-wage, repetitive tasks. And basically what we're saying is that is now like, why would you pay someone to do a low-wage, repetitive thing? So I have some very serious concerns about what's going to happen in that regard. Now, one of the things that's happening that's kind of interesting, and I can talk about this for hours, by the way, so I'm going to try to contain my response. One of the things that's kind of interesting is that the conversation about minimum basic income is starting to become a much more credible conversation, right? You get lots of governments looking at prototyping minimum basic income programs. So these are basically programs where everyone gets a basic income that should be, it's like not a lot of money, but it should be enough where you have some food to eat and maybe like a room or something, right? It's like you have a base coming in no matter who you are. You don't have to prove anything or do any tests or be looking for work or whatever. It's just like the basic dignity of all humans is assured. And so there are a lot of trials and experiments going on with these. There are a lot of reasons why people push back on them. You know, we as a species are pretty funny, so we don't like people to get something for nothing if it's not us. And so even though we'd get it too, we get worried that somebody else might get a free ride, and that would be terrible, heaven forbid. And how are we going to pay for it? Although the research on it shows that these programs almost largely pay for themselves because you do away with a lot of the other social programs that cost so much to administer. Anyway, so that's certainly a direction that some people are thinking in terms of not a solution, but in terms of some way of reframing our relationship to jobs and money. And if that happens, then, you know, I mentioned that these technologies throw up all these really thorny philosophical and ethical and moral questions. One of the things we have to consider is, how do we create our sense of self-identity if we shift towards a minimum, if we're detached from the requirement to have a job? Like, we forget that we totally invented the idea of a 40-hour work week. Like, we made that up. That's not a universal law, but we treat it like a universal law. And so when you meet someone, the first thing you say is, what do you do? And if someone says, oh, I don't do much of anything, I just kind of swan around, how do you react to that person, right? Like, really? What are you, like some rich, like, dilettante, like, brat? You know, I mean, it's like, it's a weird thing, right? We kind of define ourselves by the work that we do. And so we have some really kind of fundamental, like, existential questions to grapple with. In terms of predicting which way it's going to go, and I wrote a really long piece about this. I'm happy to send you the link. But in terms of predicting which way it's going to go, my experience is that when we predict forward, we tend to predict either like Brave New World or total dystopia. And we tend to get something somewhere in the middle, right? Like, you know, we've got iPhones, which are magical, and we've got the NSA listening to our calls, which is not so awesome, right? So we tend to get somewhere in the middle. So I'm really reluctant to say I think this is what is going to happen. I think part of this, my sense of urgency around doing this work, is that all of those risks that you described are extremely real. And if we don't have more people engaged in this conversation now, those risks will be upon us before we have a chance to make a conscious decision in a different direction. Sorry. Not every answer will be this long, I hope. Yeah.
I mean, if we're talking about change that's so dramatic it's hard to predict, maybe there is no point in preparing for it. You just have to wait for human beings to kind of get there and then get it, however that might be. I mean, often that kind of galvanises people when they're actually faced with dramatic change that's so...
I totally disagree with you. I was like, let me say something nice and empathize. I hear what you're saying. So look, basically, no matter what we do, the vast majority of the world will be struck by it, right? Like, we've got 7 billion people on the planet. I would say close to 7 billion of them are not having conversations like this, right? But some people are, and the technologies are coming like it or not. And so what we can't predict exactly the way all of the convergences will happen, right? We can't predict exactly whether the new technologies will create more jobs than they do away with, what the political implications are, what the geopolitical implications are of the collapse of oil, if that trend in solar holds true, right? There are like a lot of crazy vectors that come into play that make this stuff impossible for us to say in 10 years the world will look like this. But because we have a high degree of confidence in the trajectory of these technologies, we can start to think now about how we would like them to play out, like what we would like to see come from it. So at SU, I mentioned their mission is to leverage these technologies to address some of humanity's biggest challenges. So they've identified 12 what they call global grand challenges. So these include things like water, food, energy, healthcare, education, shelter, disaster resilience, space, et cetera. And they have a whole bunch of programs there, but they have a 10-week summer program called the GSP, the Global Solutions Program, where they get 85 people from all over the world, all walks of life, and they split up into teams, and their ambition is to form a company that will positively impact the lives of 1 billion or more people within the next decade, within 10 years, right? And each of those companies looks at one of the different global grand challenges and tries to focus their company on that. So a couple of examples, one company called BioMine that got formed from the SU GSP. They're looking at waste as a global grand challenge, and they have formed a company to mine precious metals from e-waste. So one of the dark sides of Moore's Law is this tremendous waste stream that we generate because Steve Jobs decided that you're a loser if you don't upgrade your phone every 2 years, right? Which is it's like awful, like the waste stream that we have in terms of phones. And almost all of that waste goes to landfill, and then the portion that gets recycled goes to places like this, I think it's called Guayu in China, where they do like informal recycling, and they basically have people sitting there holding circuit boards over open flame to smelt the copper from them. Right? Or like kids kind of pulling these things apart to get the metals from them. Their pollution levels are insane. Like, it's a really horrible problem. And so these guys are saying, actually, we're going to build these factories to be able to recapture these materials, because this problem is only going to increase as the number of devices increases. And we're going to put these factories in places like Guayu where the population can benefit from them and they can participate in them and have ownership in them. And so it benefits not only like the globe and humanity, but also the people who are currently most suffering from this problem. So this is the kind of thing where we go, what's that?
Well, what if you've got a robot that can do it for cheaper?
Well, probably the factory will have a robot that can do it for cheaper. And so basically what...
Point, isn't it? Because the technology is brilliant and the benefits are brilliant, but all of this needs to tie in with like an ethical balance, doesn't it?
Exactly. And so what these guys are saying is, if they put the factory in this city, it's not necessarily to employ the people to do the manual labor anymore. It's like, in the States we had this, because we have such an awful, awful history with Native Americans, then we had a thing where we're like, okay, well, you can all have casinos for free. And so then they had casinos and then they all got super rich, right? But so it's like they can have this thing in China where people can participate in the factory, in an ownership model, in a dividend model, and I don't know what, but basically remove from them the need, the obligation to be open smelting these copper circuit boards, right? They have another company called Matternet. It's addressing the issue of the 2 billion people in the world who don't have access to all-season roads, right? So they might have access to roads part of the year, but part of the year they're washed out by floods or what have you. Matternet is looking at leveraging the exponential improvement in price performance of drones, of unmanned aerial vehicles, to be able to deliver essential medicines to people who don't have access to all-season roads or people who are hit by disaster. And so this thing of like, well, we can just sit back and wait. We can sit back and wait, or we can basically each say to ourselves, I don't know, to your question, I don't know what the future is going to look like, but I have a total responsibility to do everything I can to row as hard as I can in the direction I want it to go. And whether that's enough or not, it almost doesn't matter, right? This is like, that's all we can do is go, I'd rather it turn out this way, and so I'm going to go that way, right? And we only do that by actively engaging with the topic. So thank you for that question. Sorry, they're long rants, I know, yeah.
What concepts came out this year with regards to education?
Good question. So we actually just did, we've got a few things we're doing actually here in New Zealand that I'm super, super proud of. So SU has done a couple of programs with young people. They treat that as part of their kind of impact portfolio. One of the things we did as part of this summit program is we ran a program called Find Your Billion, which was 2 weeks ago. You might have heard about it. So we had 2 people come down from SU, Brett Schilke and Sveta McShane, and then we had 2 New Zealanders, Cheryl Doig out of Christchurch and Chris Clay out of Auckland. Awesome, like education futurist innovator people. The 4 of them co-created this program, and we ran it as free one-day workshops for high school kids in the 3 main centers. So we had just under 600 kids participate across Christchurch, Wellington, Auckland. The kids got an introduction to exponential technologies, an introduction to the global grand challenges. They got an introduction to storytelling through science fiction. So Sveta gave this awesome talk where she talked about how in 1865, I think it was, Jules Verne wrote a story about 3 men who took off in a spaceship from Florida. They went to the moon, they landed on the moon, they came back, they landed somewhere in the Pacific Ocean. It was basically like 100 years before the moon landing. The story described exactly the moon landing, and she gave all sorts of examples of science fiction predicting the future over and over again. Which really gave the kids permission to kind of think freely, because if it sounds crazy, you can just call it science fiction and not really worry about whether the technology's there yet. And those kids, it was a world first program, because like I said, they've run programs for kids at SU, but never in this particular format, this one-day thing. And it was really phenomenal. The kids then had to come up with an idea to leverage exponential tech for one of the grand challenges. They had to pitch it at the end. We had one team get up and they were like, our problem that we're tackling is space debris, like left from satellites and, space junk, basically. And so we've come up with a space whale that's going to go around in low Earth orbit and eat all the space junk. We had another group of kids and they were like, we're tackling energy. So we've come up with clothes that have solar power embedded in the fibers, and so you can just put your cell phone in your pocket and it'll charge. Really cool kind of things that these kids came up with, and that was tremendous. So we're super excited about that. With Summit, what we've done is we've actually done our pricing. We've done 3 different kind of buckets of pricing. So they're full price tickets, which are basically for companies like Spark. It's for corporate customers, right? So it's priced pretty much where you'd find the price for a high-end corporate conference. So if you look at that price and you're like, that's ridiculous, it's because you're not the customer that it's targeted at. And then we said, actually, we don't just want high-end corporate customers to come to this event. We want educators and nonprofits and entrepreneurs and innovators. And so we set up a different pricing structure for them that's about a third or less of the full price. And then we said, and we actually want lots of young people there as well. So if you are 25 or under as of the first day of Summit, you can come for less than a tenth of the cost of the full price tickets. And these are it's pretty evenly distributed across the 3. It's not like we did 5 tickets at the low price. And really, we did this because we wanted to make a political statement with our pricing that we wanted the right people in the room. And the definition of right people is not dictated by the size of your checkbook. And that's another innovation that's come out of what we're doing here that we're now seeing replicated with people who are doing other summits around the world for next year. And same with Find Your Billion. They're now looking to replicate that in other markets around the world. So super stoked about that. Yeah.
The concept you talk about still hasn't changed the political boundaries around the world when you look at Africa. Have we still been able to feed Africa? And even all those concepts that we look to roll out, we still haven't seen Africa being fed. And not just picking one country. You look at North Korea. How does that change? Where their economies are totally different and their political views are totally different to the Western world. I mean,
Yep.
how does that go to change? Because we're changing really quickly, but you've got part of the world, and we talk about 80% unemployment. I would suggest a fair chunk of that unemployment will relate to the continents of Africa and probably continents of Asia as well. And that hasn't changed. So you're changing one part or a small part of the world, not able to change the biggest part of the world where the problems do or are there now and haven't changed for decades.
Yeah, so I'm definitely not an expert on Africa. I know it's many countries, not one. I will say that I don't think it's totally accurate to say that nothing has changed there. So one of the things that we've seen in Africa, for example, is that, and this will be the last question I take because I know our time's up and a lot of you have to get home to dinner, is that, they, for example, with cell phones, right, they didn't have landlines at all, and then they skipped the whole landline thing and went straight to cell phones, right? And so what happens in Africa now is they have this whole new, they've used the technology to generate an entirely new way of transacting, right? So you can have things like M-Pesa where you can transact through text, you can send money through text, and that's completely transformed the way that the local economies operate. So does that mean it'll shift to be looking like a Western economy? Probably not. Do we necessarily want them to look like a Western economy? I don't think so. Like, I don't think that we have any kind of monopoly on this is, you should model yourselves on us. But as these technologies continue to grow, what will happen is we'll see more and more innovations coming out of places like that, right? North Korea is a tricky one because it's so isolated that it's much harder to even know what's going on in there, let alone for them to get access to these technologies. But you look at things like the Arab Spring, right, which was totally. It's not that it would have been impossible before social media and before these technologies, but it was certainly facilitated by them. And so all of a sudden, the way that people start to engage with each other, with political movements, et cetera, that all starts to change as well. So, does it mean that all the problems of the world have been solved and we're feeding Africa? No. Does it mean that nothing has changed? I don't think that's really accurate to say either. I think it's probably time for me to wrap up, is it?
Probably time. You're going to have one more question.
Okay, yeah. I'm happy to take questions as long as you want. I just know people are starting to trickle out.
Just about climate change, because that's
Yeah, climate change, one of the global grand challenges. Massive, massive issue. I had a really depressing conversation the other day with a Christchurch city councillor who had come to my talk. And he came to my talk and he watched the whole thing and he loved it and he saw the thing about the energy of the solar, exponential improvement in price performance of solar. And then I went, we just had the election, so I went, he's in my ward, and so I went to do a meet the candidates thing. And I live in the coastal ward, so I'm like super susceptible to sea level rise. And I put my hand up and said, what do you think is an effective and reasonable response in terms of sea level rise for us in our ward? And he was like, well, I saw your talk and, people are worried about sea level rise, but solar's improving at an exponential rate. And so we don't need to worry about it anymore. And I was like, oh my God, what have I done? It's a huge issue. I think it is one of the biggest issues that we face because I don't even know if we can solve it. Like hunger, we can solve. If we had the political will and the social will and if we can solve education, right? We can solve shelter. I don't know that we can solve climate change. And the reason I don't know if we can solve climate change is because of the feedback loops that exist in climate that create the potential for nonlinear effects. So this counselor guy, when I asked my question, he was like, well, sea level's going up by like 1.5 millimeters to 2.5 millimeters a year. And so I think we should have a plan and then check in every 10 years or so. And some of the things, I'm actually right now also involved in a project in Antarctica and dealing with Gary Wilson, who's the chief scientific advisor for Antarctica, New Zealand, and had a conversation with him about this very thing. And one of the things that they're concerned about is not that it continues to go up by 1.5 millimeters a year, it's that we have a nonlinear effect, a kind of shock effect that causes it to go up by a substantial amount in a very short time frame. And so specifically some of the things they're concerned about is the Ross Ice Shelf that, if you There are some headlines that are like, yay, Ross Ice Shelf is actually growing, hooray. But the ice shelf sticks out into the sea. And if you want an ice shelf to grow in the sea, what you need to do is give it a supply of fresh water, because salt water doesn't freeze, and a supply of cold water. And basically where that fresh water and cold water appears to be coming from is from underneath the ice shelf where it's melting. And so the concern that they have now is that it's melting from underneath, and that there's a chance that big chunks of it, if not the whole thing, loses its grip on the rock and basically slides into the ocean. And then we're looking at, just catastrophic devastation. So I think climate change is actually probably the single biggest thing we should be worried about right now, because when those nonlinear effects hit, it's way too late, right? Like by the time we get that kind of effect, there's nothing we can do about it. And so, the cause for optimism, I have a few different causes for optimism in that regard, not blind optimism, but causes for hope, shall we say. So one is that price performance in solar, while it's not a yay, now we don't have to do anything, that's certainly a positive trajectory. Two is, as that price performance in solar is increasing, we're also seeing the shift towards electric cars. Thank you, Elon Musk, right? And why are we seeing a shift towards electric cars? It's not because we care about climate. It's not because all of a sudden we've seen the light and gone, oh, we're going to, petrol cars are bad for the environment. We're going to buy an electric one because it's better for the planet. Like, we are just selfish creatures. I'm not saying, not you guys are awesome, but like humanity generally, right? Like, when we deal with climate change, the way that we tend to tackle it, the way the climate movement has tended to tackle it, is exactly opposite to everything we know about human behavior. Right? When we look at human behavior, what we ask people to do with climate change is make behavioral changes, which is a super hard thing to do, because of a large-scale, far-away, abstract problem that we get no feedback for our behavior change, and we know for a fact that whatever our behavior change is, the impact on the problem is like tiny. Right? So this is like everything against the way that humans operate, right? We can't even get people to quit smoking when they themselves are going to die of cancer, let alone, turn out the lights because of climate change. So why are people shifting to electric cars? Because the electric car that we have now is better. It's a better choice. It's more beautiful, it's faster, it's sexier, it's cheaper to run. Like, my stepbrother has a Tesla, and he's never been a petrol head, and he is so in love with his car. He gets excited every time he walks into the car. He's like, look at this, I'm going to walk into my car and the handle's going to pop out as I approach. Like, it's ridiculous. He's obsessed with it. But every Tesla owner I know is like that with their car. And so what happens is that people switch when we get an alignment with what people will actually choose because they think it's best for them and what is better for the planet, then we're going to start to see some really positive things. Same thing with the Impossible Foods burgers. Like, I'm worried for the New Zealand economy, but I'm excited for the planet that we're starting to shift towards plant-based foods and towards proteins that are generated from plants, because that's way better for the planet, right? We've got something like 25% of greenhouse gas emissions. In New Zealand, half of our greenhouse gas emissions come from primary industry. So if we were to shift towards a plant-based model, and we're not going to do that because we care about the planet, we're going to do that because we might have to stay competitive, and because we might get some pressures in terms of, emissions trading schemes or whatever, and, with our obligations under the Paris Treaty. Like, there are more and more pressures coming to bear. But if you have market pressures combined with political pressures, combined with technological advancements that create a different alternative, then we might be able to see some real progress. So thank you. That's a super awesome question. Right. Surely I'm done now.
Yeah, I think we've probably had enough. I know I'm not going to be able to sleep tonight. My brain's.
I never sleep.
I'm afraid I'm going to topple over. My head's so full now. That was truly amazing and mind-blowing. Thank you so much. And I'm sure you guys all feel exactly the same way. We could go on all night asking questions. I know we could, but you're right. We are going to have to clear out of this room at some point. So thank you so much, Kaila, on behalf of Spark Labs and on behalf of everyone here. That was an amazing talk. We really appreciate it. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Wow, that was awesome. Thank you very much, guys, for coming. Thanks to Spark, and do please use the Mobi site to provide feedback to us. We really need the feedback, and to find out when the next events are. Oh, you didn't get texted a little link to it with you? Some people did. Sorry, you must have got. You're supposed to get texted a link, but I can.